Hello, everybody. Thanks for coming out. My name is Zach, and I'm from Grok, and I'm a compiler engineer there. And today I'd like to talk about how to win friends and influence the hardware. So at Grok, we serve a variety of models on our own custom hardware, and a lot of these models come from PyTorch. And the way that we go about serving these models is, or one of the ways, and ingestion pathways, is we take models from PyTorch, export them into the ONNX format, and then through ONNX MLIR, we can then transform them into our own MLIR-based representation. One of the issues, though, that we have sometimes is that there could be some information loss that occurs during the PyTorch to ONNX transformation. And by information loss, what I mean is that there could potentially be type loss. There might be some transformation passes that occur during the PyTorch to ONNX transformation, or there might be some information you'd actually like to embed into the PyTorch model, but might be lost during the conversion to the ONNX model. And this sort of problem or this will present a problem when you're trying to retain that information at some point, right? And what are some examples of this, I guess? Well, things we might want to retain are, where these constants are coming from in the ONNX protobuf. So some sort of mapping between originally where they were in the PyTorch model and where they were in the ONNX protobuf, especially after constant propagation. We also might want to have some idea about the program structure or what that program structure used to be, right? So with PyTorch, there's a bunch of nested modules, and then there's also instances of modules, right? So depending on how you export your graph, there might be multiple invocations of the same module, right? And that represents somewhat of a program structure. So it might be interesting for different purposes and different use cases to capture that sort of idea. And also, we might want to do some metaprogramming. So we might want to be able to affect the sort of semantics without actually changing the ONNX protobuf itself or any of the behavior of the operations, right? So we might want to give specific regions of code, specific meanings, depending on what we're trying to achieve. So sort of as a solution for this, something that we've been developing is something called PyTorch annotations. And this sort of sits on top of the PyTorch part of the stack. So prior to the ONNX export or the ONNX MLIR or even PyTorch. And it's supposed to be an opt-in approach. One of the bigger ideas is that we'd like to take a model as is and sort of be able to inject arbitrary information, structured information, or very specific and fine granular information at different parts of the model without drastically modifying the model's behavior or the model's output or how the model would run, right, in PyTorch or say ONNX runtime. So what are PyTorch annotations? What have we done here? What does all this mean? So this annotation library basically at this point consists of 4 different parts. So PyTorch module annotations, and these basically are these sorts of annotations that you would insert on top of PyTorch modules themselves. Parameter annotations. So these are kind of annotations for the different weights or constants that are part of the PyTorch.nn modules. Individual operator annotations. So this is when you want to annotate a specific operation, like a torch.mul or a torch.mapmul, something like that. And then also very, very fine-grained annotations that we've called tensor annotations. So this is not when you want to necessarily annotate an operator itself, but maybe a value coming into that operator, or just a value coming out of that operator, right? There's some sort of metadata you'd like to insert onto that specific operation. What do these annotations really look like? Well, what we really were going for is this sort of opt-in approach. So for the module annotations case, what this sort of annotation approach manifests itself as is a decorator on top of the module, right? So instead of needing to modify, any of the internal code or, insert anything, this kind of annotations library allows you to add like a small little decorator. And then there's a dot module method. And then inside of there, you can inject different pieces of information that I'm going to be showing a little bit later. Also for parameter annotations, we kind of express this as type annotations. So within a given torch module, what you can do is depending on the types of .nn parameters. So in this case, my module is derived from a torch.nn.linear, and that specific torch module has a weight and bias. So right here, this is illustrating that we're going to be injecting some sort of metadata onto the weight parameter that can be recovered later. And then we also support, as I was saying, operator and tensor annotations. And the way that these are kind of written right now is almost through like an op-like interface. So for an op annotation, what you would do is you would call the annotate.op, and you would inject some information there. And then you'd also add the specific torch operation, so a torch.mapmul or torch.mul. And then for a tensor level annotation, it would just be the tensor that you'd like to actually annotate, and then the types of metadata that you'd like to insert. So let's jump into some code and get a bit more technical and see what this actually means. So this is an example of a fully fledged torch module that contains annotations. So as you can see, we have the torch module itself. We have a module level annotation at the very top. And there's something called the precision annotation. And then we also, within the forward function, we have a op level annotation on the torch.mul operation. And you can see that we've also given it a precision annotation. So if I was to break this down, what are these different moving parts? Well, they can kind of be seen as two different pieces. So we have these annotation type functions. And these annotation type functions are the things that are actually going to kind of modify your torch modules. And also these annotation data types. And this is going to be all of the metadata that you'd like to associate at a specific PyTorch level that you'd like to recover within the ONNX graph at a later point. So for the data types itself, and this would be like the metadata that you'd be injecting into the graph, we represent this right now just through a very simple data class to try to make it as unopinionated as possible. So right now, the base data class is called a torch annotation, and it takes a key and a value. And the value is basically any type or any sort of metadata that you'd like to inject at that specific part in the PyTorch module. And the key is just a unique identifier that we're going to be using inside of the ONNX implementation a little bit later on to identify what type of metadata that you're injecting at that specific PyTorch level. And continuing with the example for this precision annotation that I was showing before in a few slides, right? This is a child class of the torch annotation. And the idea here is that this precision annotation is injecting some type information at a specific level inside the PyTorch graph that we can capture later, right? Inside of our compiler and inside of the ONNX graph that we might want to manipulate with at a certain point, right? And just as I was saying before, like, this torch annotation is unopinionated as possible. You really can just inject any sort of data that you would like to recover later on, right? In a positional fashion, right? So that data will come up at that position at that specific ONNX node in some way or fashion that I'm going to be showing in a second. So how do these actual annotation types work, right? So you've seen like that, okay, there's this general idea of this metadata class, and now there has to be something that actually adds this metadata class in some form or fashion to the output ONNX graph, right? So I'm going to be just starting with the module level annotations, which are expressed right now through a decorator. And it looks like this kind of annotate.module. And the idea here is that what this decorator is actually doing is that it's going to be taking, first, it's going to be modifying the forward function of the torch modules. And it's going to be modifying each one of the different arguments of the forward function. And we're going to see why in a second. But the idea is that we're going to modify all of the input arguments for the module, and we're also going to modify the output arguments for the module. And the output argument modification is not shown in the red box, but it's called annotate module post forward. The input argument modifications is in the annotate module pre-forward. What does this actually mean? Well, the way that we're kind of accomplishing this is that we're looping over all of the different input arguments that exist as torch tensors. And we are calling a custom operation. And in this case, it's within the Groq domain space, and it's called the annotate module operation. Inside of this custom op, which will appear in ONNX in a second, but it takes in a single tensor, an annotation keyword argument, which is just a string. And this string can be any sort of data that you'd like to encode for that particular annotation, right? A group, which is used to uniquely identify a collection of these like module annotations, and sort of this terminal property, which defines whether the custom op is the beginning of a module or end of the module, right? And this is sort of to encode that structural information that you might like to recover a little bit later. And now getting sort of to the ONNX part, inside of this custom op, right now in PyTorch, what you can actually do is define your own custom ops. And I'm pretty sure a lot of you guys are familiar with this, but just as a small refresher, the way that you would do this is through this torch.library.define. And inside of this function, you give both a domain. So that would be like for our company, like the Groq domain, and then the operator name. And the operator here is just called the annotate module operation. And then you also provide a implementation. So that's the torch.library.impl. And this is basically so that whenever the modules actually run, it knows exactly what to do. And the key thing to sort of take away here is that I'm just returning the tensor as is, right? So this is more or less an identity operation. But the really nice thing, though, is you're going to see in a second that when it's translated to ONNX, the unused arguments are kept within the ONNX protobuf. So the annotation string, the group, and the whether or not it marks the start of a torch module or the end of a torch module are going to be kept in the ONNX protobuf. You also have to define an abstract implementation, and this is just a torch-specific detail. But all this means is that this is going to be the class that's called whenever you're working with metadata-only tensors or fake tensors, if you're familiar with that sort of terminology from PyTorch. And then here's where really like the ONNX integration comes in. And what this is this is a way of defining specific custom operators right now inside PyTorch for ONNX. So there's like a few different moving pieces right here, but the big ones are at the very bottom of the screen. So you can see the torch.onnx.register custom op symbolic. And this will register a custom operator within the PyTorch ONNX registry, so to mark it as valid. Slightly above that right there, where you see the output.setType. This is actually type inference inside of PyTorch. So ONNX actually allows you within PyTorch to do a little bit of type inference for these custom ops. And the nice thing about this is since it's an identity, the input types are going to be just the same as the output types. And then obviously the op definition. So right now, the symbolic op definition is just going to include the name of the operation, the values that it takes in, and all of the metadata. Okay. Just going a little bit more forward, we can do the same thing with parameter annotations. So we can do something kind of sneaky, but we can actually define a very similar custom operator. So the annotate parameter operation, all of the same sort of methods you're used to. But the nice thing is, though, since it's a type annotation, it's not necessarily an op that's part of the graph. But PyTorch has this torchfx, which is a source-to-source converter that we can actually utilize to insert this annotate parameter custom operation inside of the graph dynamically. So what we can actually do is we can use torchfx to dynamically modify a PyTorch module to insert this custom operation along with any of the metadata that might be encoded. And then just going back onto sort of the example that I showed before, we can then substitute that previous module with this source-to-source converted module with these parameter annotations, right? Okay, and then just to wrap things up, what does this actually look like in terms of like what the Onyx graph looks like? So if we just take this specific module, what is this going to end up looking like? Well, this is what the Onyx MLIR finally starts to look like. So as you can see, all of those annotations that I was talking about are actually turned into Onyx MLIR custom operations. So you can see right now in the function names, they're all the same function names of the custom operators that I showed you in PyTorch. And you'll notice that we have a bunch of different interesting metadata, right? So one of the interesting things is that we can actually have the same, we can have shape and type inference using this custom operator. So since this is an identity, it's going to be we can use this type inference to infer that the output type of whatever this Onyx custom operator is going to be the same as the input type of the tensor. But we can also have structural information. So basically, for the annotate module operators, we can identify what group that they're part of, so what module they were originally part of, where the module starts, where the module ends using the terminal property. And finally, we can recover the annotation information. And it's something that I hadn't said before, but I'll bring up right now, is that this annotation information right now, at least, is just a JSON string, right? So it's as simple as like decoding a JSON string and then changing it in some way or some pattern after the fact. And that is the end of the presentation. Hopefully I didn't go too fast through the end bit, but just wanted to share an interesting way of injecting arbitrary metadata into PyTorch graphs. So I'll open the floor to questions.
Yep, let's stick to one question in the interest of time.
Thanks for the talk. You showed the Onyx custom ops with metadata.
Yep.
We know in Onyx there's metadata props, and some of them seems to be relevant to kind of annotating values and stuff. So I was wondering if you have considered using metadata props, and if you see any challenges there.
I'm honestly not too familiar with the metadata props. But yeah, like if they are a good way of representing this sort of metadata, then the implementation of sort of this annotations library is pretty flexible. So if it's a lot more flexible to represent sort of this metadata in terms of that, then yeah, it would definitely consider.
Got it. Thanks. I would be curious to see if the Onyx IR9 with all the new metadata props view would be a suitable way of storing this kind of data for your use.
Awesome. Thanks so much.